The bright side of addiction is recovery. And recovery is as recovery does. And if you are in recovery, keep doing it day by day. Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast. If you're new to our podcast, we welcome you. And if you've been here before, welcome back. And if you are in recovery or know or love someone who is, or simply want to know more about the recovery process, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love who is harmfully using alcohol or any other drug, this is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery, and we've done it now for, 20 years. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured interviews with actor John LaRoquette, former NFL star Ryan Leaf, sports super agent Lee Steinberg, authors Anne Lamott and Claudia Black, J.A. Jantz, and Grammy Award winner Judy Collins. Plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, and their path. Now, in this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, I take a look back to find a man who was my mentor, my hero, my friend. He was a giant in the field of addiction counseling and treatment and in the recovery movement, and a person who was grateful and proud of many decades of long-term recovery. His name, Mel Schulstad. Here's a clip from today's podcast, an archived interview with Mel Schulstad.
I was dispatched to the Pentagon from my base in Hawaii then with top secret war plans. I got drunk. I don't know what happened to them. I lost them. They never showed up in the Pentagon. They were going to courts-martial me, which meant that at my point in life, a father of four, the first of whom was just entering college, the first number one, and the other three yet to go, and I'm looking at a courts-martial which would have put me out of the Air Force, a dishonorable discharge, no retirement pay, and maybe even breaking rocks in a federal prison because losing a top-secret war plan in the middle of a war.
My archive conversation with Mel Schulstad is coming up next, and we will conclude our podcast with some thoughts on 12-step programs from award-winning actor Danny Trejo, who has over 50 years in recovery. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org, and if you'd like to help us out financially, or you know of a foundation or a corporation that might be interested in underwriting part of our program, we would be ever so grateful. A reminder, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. We would love to hear from you. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. In fact, they are listed in Newsweek magazine's recent list of America's top treatment providers. You know, a good treatment center is not a place to stop drinking for a month, only to return to drink again after a period of drying out. That's not what good treatment is all about. Treatment is a life-changing decision to end the pain of addiction for men and women and their families. And frankly, families often get as sick, if not sicker, than the active user. They are caught on that merry-go-round of denial. And, that's why Sundown M Ranch has an excellent family treatment program so that loved ones will come to realize the nature of addiction and how to navigate the bumpy road of recovery. Sundown is not a newcomer to treatment programs. They have been successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for nearly 60 years. They're recognized nationally for best practices. Their ever-expanding alumni program overflows with gratitude for lives saved from the destruction of addictive disease. Sundown is a not-for-profit treatment organization whose bottom line is not measured in dollars, but in long-term recovery. They own their own land at the mouth of the beautiful Yakima River Canyon in central Washington. It's not far from Seattle. Their rates are among the lowest in the country. And their staff? Top notch, well trained, dedicated, and compassionate. Many of them are in long term recovery themselves. Now, if someone you know or love is in need of treatment for addictive disease, by all means look around, do your research. But please, please consider Sundown in your search. And if you go to their website, sundown.org, you can get a lot more information, as well as seeing photos of their beautiful facility. Sundown is where recovery begins. Find it at sundown.org. Yeah, it's coffee time, coffee and conversation. Now, for today's interview, I've reached back into the private archives in order to share a powerful tribute story about an amazing man who, gosh, I knew for decades. He was a true pioneer in the recovery movement and in the field of addiction counseling and treatment. He was the co-founder and former president of NADAC. And if you're unfamiliar with NADAC, it's the National Addiction Treatment Counseling Organization. And that organization's most prestigious award given annually is named after Mel. It's called the Mel Schulstad NADAC Professional of the Year Award. Mel was a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. He spent 27 years in service to our country, including flying 44 combat missions. Born in Duluth, Minnesota, he passed away in Seattle 23 years ago at the age of 93 on January 6, 2012. He left a legacy of service, gratitude, and love. We start our tribute with Mel reflecting on when he took his very first drink.
The first drink. I was coming home on a Monday morning with my favorite hunting uncle, and he had some homemade beer. Now, this was during Prohibition, because when Prohibition came along in 1932, I was only 14 years old. But I do remember the pre-Prohibition days when only booze available was bootleg alcohol up in my home state, brought in from Canada, or homemade brew, homemade beer. And this uncle of mine has made homemade beer. How he kept it from his mother, I'll never know. But coming home this particular Monday morning from a wonderful weekend with my elders.
You were how old at the time?
Well, I was 11. I was 11 years old. And my uncle reached into the back seat of his car. He was driving. I was the only other person in the car, and he pulled out a bottle of beer, homemade beer that he had capped at home after he made his beer. Took himself 2-3 big slugs and said, turning to me in a fun sort of way, "Ever tasted this stuff, Junior," as I was called? I said, "No, I never have." He says, "Here, try some." So he hands me this bottle of beer. Wasn't cold, as I recall, but I didn't know the difference between cold, warm, and hot in those days. But anyhow, I took a big swallow of this stuff, and I remember it going down and down and down, and then it backed up through my nostrils because it was partly had a lot of soda pop kind of bubbles in it.
Effervescence
in it. Effervesced up through my nose, and it stung, and my eyes had to close, and I thought, oh, but then a miracle happened. It went all the way down, and it went kerplunk. And it spread its warmth and magnificence throughout my whole little 11-year-old body. I had never swallowed anything like that before in my life that had that kind of impact on my way I felt. It was a tremendous experience, but I didn't record it as such. In order to talk about it later, it was just one of those things, perhaps like the first time you hit yourself on the thumb with a hammer when you're making a bird cage or something. It was a memorable experience, but there we are. By the time I was finishing up high school, I already had a reputation in this little country town for being a drinking fella. And my family, which owned a small hardware store, had employed me as a clerk. My specialty was hauling 5-gallon cans of paint and 100-pound barrels of nails. Strong young fellow. And I think I was paid something like $1 a day. This was pretty good pay for a teenager. I remember shocking wheat for $1 a day from 6 in the morning till 8 at night. And so $1 a day at least got me close to the cash register in the store. And maybe I wasn't too careful in counting my pay as I took it out of the till each day. I recall entering the last couple of years of high school when I was 16, 17, quite frequently having used up my dollar's worth of pay by 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, simply running back and forth across the street to the bars and drinking beer, 10 cents a glass. And so I would just kind of borrow some extra money and kind of keep myself in a good mood most of the day, which I don't think the word alcoholism didn't exist in my time and in my little country town. We had drunks. The two biggest drunks in town were very fine, established businessmen. Everybody knew who they were. They were good Norwegians up in my part of the country, and they went on what was called benders in those days, and they still are benders, I guess. And when they got bad enough, then their parents or the family would arrange with the one-man police department. I think he had a sheriff's star on. No, that was the county. We just had a policeman. And they would put these guys one at a time in the city jail, which was a one-cell operation, and leave them there till they sobered up. That was it. Everybody knew that. The whole town knew when these people by name were sobering up, because they'd rattle a cage down there and beg for booze. Or I remember one of these dignified city businessmen coming to my grandmother's back door one time, looking like he had been through an awful, awful time, covered with vomit and standing there with no shave and shaking, and said to me, a little boy then of 10 years old, "Is your grandma home?" And I said, "No, she's not." He said, "Would you look in the pantry and see if there's any vanilla?" And I said to myself, what does he want vanilla for? As I knew Grandma used vanilla to bake cakes, and later on, of course, I realized that vanilla in those days was about 30-40% alcohol. And here was this grown man, a citizen of considerable reputation, standing there begging for a bottle of vanilla. It didn't make much of an impression on me because he was a drunk. Alcoholic was not a term that was used in my community in those years. But we all loved him. Everybody thought he was a fine fellow, and he was most of the time. I really didn't become convinced that I had an alcohol problem. I kept it covered up very well from my parents, from my grandparents and my uncles and aunts, although I know one uncle had kind of figured me out. But I don't think they knew what to do about it. How could they preach? They all drank, and so on and so forth. But a blessed and beloved auntie told me I was going to go to college, and that she had arranged for my entrance into the state university, where her dear friend was the dean?
The dean
of the university. So she felt it was a good place to go. Well,
this was back in North Dakota?
This was been in North Dakota. The year would have been 1935, and I was 17 years old. I graduated pretty well close to the top of my class, et cetera, et cetera. So off I go to college. Well, wow. A friend of the family's got a hold of me and said, well, you got to come and join my fraternity. We got all the hip guys. We got all the musicians. We got all the, matter of fact, the man who leads the university band is a member of our fraternity. Well, I was playing music in those days, so I signed up for the fraternity. And there we discovered all kinds of ways to drink booze of various kinds. And you could take alcohol, for example, and take 5 to 10 ounces of alcohol and pour it in a quart of wine, and you got some real fine drinking stuff there. And even girls would drink it, you know. So I progressed down the road to fun and games and drinking and having a wonderful time. I didn't really have any time to go to school because I started playing in the university band, I started playing in the university orchestra, and then we struck up a kind of a little dance band, 11 pieces there in my fraternity, and we were playing out evenings.
What instrument did you play?
Well, I played a great big baritone sax in those days. It's about 3 or 4 feet long. And anyhow, but then I started singing as a trio because I found if you sang, you could stand up front where the girls could see you better. And they let the saxophone sit back there. But anyhow, I was a hip guy in college, and so there came that day when this dean sadly had to call me in and say, "I'm so sorry to tell you this, and I'm ashamed for your family, but don't even try to register for a second year." And I pretended I was surprised. I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "You have cut classes more so than any student since this university was founded as a land-grant college in 1889, and it's now 1935. So you see where I spent my time. We're right across the street from East Grand Forks, Minnesota, which sold hard liquor, so I didn't have to confine myself to this measly beer and juiced-up wine. I could get real stuff, martinis made out of alcohol. You know, now we use gin, but then, so I was thrown out of college. I was thrown out of college at the ripe old age of 18. So I went down and got a job. That lasted about 3 weeks. And the manager one day, and I think I was paid, this would be 1935, 36, I was paid probably $65 every 2 weeks. I don't know what that means in dollars per day. It was in a hardware store because I knew hardware. About the third week, he greeted me at the door, and he had in his hand what he owed me in pay up to that day and hour, and he said, "Here's your pay. You're all through. You're fired." And he says, "We don't want people like you working in this store. I've checked up on you at your You're staying at the YMCA, and you haven't paid your bill since you've been here. You're coming home drunk every night, raising hell all the time, and you're fired." Well, that was another blow. I got thrown out of college, and I was fired a few weeks later. I got another job, working for a mortician, which was a very interesting job, to say the least. I learned about a great deal about human nature. I got to drive an ambulance with a siren going through town and waving at the girls, drinking all the time on a salary, believe it or not, room, board, and $40 a month cash. Well, I didn't go very far. After all, East Grand Forks was nearby. There was a bar every third building. They all knew me. "Hi, here comes Mel." They all had slot machines, so $40 lasted a very short time. Well, the boss was kind and generous. He said, "I'm going to leave a little cash under my blotter on my desk, and if any of you guys, there were 2 of us, who need a little extra help now and then, help yourself put it back." Well, I helped myself a few times but forgot to put it back, so he called me in after about 8 or 9 months, I think, of going up this learning curve. He says, "I noticed you've been taking money off of the place where I said you could take it, but I also noticed you haven't been putting it back. And I've been watching your habits and your control of yourself, and we just don't want a drunk working around here anymore. You're fired." So there I am, shortly out of college. I've been thrown out of college because I drank my way out, and that's the brutal truth. I was fired from the first job because they didn't like my habits, which were publicly visible to a lot of people. And my second job, which was given to me by this particular mortician because he was a friend of the family's, and I know he took me on for that reason, but they fired me because of my, again, behavior. And, of course, nobody ever said, "Listen, buddy, you got a drinking problem. You're an alcoholic." Nobody ever said that. I don't think anybody wanted to say that.
Did you make the connection?
Well, I was beginning to understand that my lack of control of my behavior was resulting in these downfalls, which were crushing blows to my ego, especially since my family was held in particularly high esteem in that part of the county and the cities around there. And here I am. I'm coming along, becoming a truly great, wonderful black sheep. And I didn't like it. And my family obviously didn't know what to do with me either. And, of course, I had long ago discovered the delightful pleasures of cigarettes, because you could buy, thanks to the courtesy of the tobacco companies, a nickel bag of tobacco all ground up, and then you got free paper so you could roll your own, and you got about 20 smokes out of that for 5 cents. That's a good way to get a kid started, isn't it?
It sure is.
Along with 10-cent beer.
Mel loved to fly, and he learned to fly early.
While I was in college, it was possible for me to learn how to fly in a Piper Cub, since the charge for learning was $8 an hour. Now, that's not a joke. That's what this pilot really charged to sit in an airplane with me, fly dual, put gas in it, and teach me how to fly. Because long story short, I learned how to fly off of a stubble field, a cut wheat field. I think he soloed me in about 4 hours, and I was bitten by the bug. Right next door in Minnesota, Charles Lindbergh had flown the Atlantic, which was every bit as big a deal in my day as going to the moon was in later years. So I decided I wanted to go off and enlist in the Army Air Corps because I was going to become a pilot. I had seen a brochure. It said, the following people are eligible to be considered for pilot training. It began with West Point, Naval Academy, 6 years of engineering, 6 years of this, that, all kinds of high college degrees. But down at the bottom, it had a little teaser. It said, and selected enlisted men. Well, that, of course, was me. That's me. I went off and attempted to enlist in 1938, which was 1 year before Hitler invaded Poland. There was no draft or anything, but I went down to Minneapolis, which was 400 miles away, was introduced to the flight surgeon who was going to give me a physical test, 1938. No draft. Nobody wants to hire. Private pay was $21 a month, less $3 for laundry and insurance. So it wasn't big money I was after. I wanted to be a pilot. I sat down in the chair, and he pointed to a chart up on the wall straight in front of me, covered up one eye, and said, read the top line. And I went A, J, K, C, J. He said, that's all. I said, that's all? Yeah, he says, you missed 2. That's all. You're all through. You flunked. Go on home, back to North Dakota. Tail between my legs, I went back to North Dakota. I think I rode a freight train on the way back because I probably didn't have much money for a bus. But I came back the next year, 1939, and I passed their test. And I went off and enlisted. Now, on $18 a month, even at 10 cents a bottle, you can't get a whole lot of alcohol into your system. And believe you me, by then I had convinced my family not to send me money because they knew what would happen to it. I'd either smoke it up in nicotine or drink it up in alcohol. So my $18 probably for the most part went for beer, which the Air Force, the Armed Services always take care of their enlisted men. Plenty of tobacco, plenty of beer, lowest prices possible. Come on into PX and get whatever you need. And so, anyhow, at that rate, I didn't sustain a good, healthy alcoholism. I can tell you that, but I probably drank up most of it. I was sent to armament school, learned how to be a gunner and how to be a bomb sight expert and how to take bombs apart. And then I went out to March Field, Riverside, California, where I was assigned to some of the earliest YB, meaning the earliest possible models of this enormously wonderful big bomber called a Boeing B-17. I got to be a gunner in one of those and fired guns out of the tail and out of the side, wore an oxygen mask, and gee whiz, it was really wonderful. Marchfield was a wonderful place near Hollywood where a lot of films were shot with stars and beautiful young ladies, and we GIs got to be lined up and had our picture taken, et cetera, et cetera. So as my pay went up as an enlisted man, I was first a private, that's $18. Then my pay skyrocketed up to $30 a month. I sat on the bed one night and said, what am I going to do with all this extra money? Well, of course, I converted from Bull Durham to Chesterfield. They were 15 cents a pack. And I could have a little more beer. And then I got to be, after a PFC, I got to be a corporal, and then my pay went up to about $40. And then I got to be a sergeant and a staff sergeant. Wow, I was making $72 a month in 1941. And then along about then happened Pearl Harbor, and there was a big draft. Thousands of men were pulled into the Army, Air Force, and here I am, a great big sergeant by now. I got all these draftees to worry about. But I continued to learn how to fly because we had some pilot training airplanes on my base, and I got myself assigned to one of them as a crew chief so I could go flying all the time. And by the time I got off to flying school in 1941, my upperclassmate, this is always interesting to people, was a fellow by the name of Jimmy Stewart. He graduated a class ahead of me, and we both went off to four-engine bombers. He got into B-24s in England, and I got into B-17s in England. And we both went over as second lieutenants. He came out a full colonel somehow or other, and I came out a major about 33 months later. But during that time, I had acquired a very distinct reputation as a drinking guy, a party guy, always ready to go and hoist 1 or 2 or 17 with anybody that wanted to. And also, I think, a very, very good reputation as a very, very good, I'll even go so far as to say, a superior pilot.
Following the end of the war, there were new challenges ahead for Colonel Schulstad. Following the end of the war, there were new challenges ahead for Colonel Schulstad.
Then the end of the war brought me home, and I was married, and I started having children, and I continued to drink. I wound up as a director of pilot training at Randolph Field. I had about 400 aircraft under my control, teaching primary and basic, and still raising a family and drinking all the time. I got drunk at a neighboring base, and they decided to send me home in a friend's station wagon. I went through the gate at Randolph Field as a lieutenant colonel, passed out cold in the back end of a station wagon. This poor private first class on guard at the gate looks down at this lieutenant colonel passed out and a bottle of whiskey swishing around. So what should we do with him? And I guess they called the guard, and they put me in the BOQ with a note left to my not surprised, saying, report to the wing commander at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, which I did. And he was very unhappy with my behavior and was about to courts-martial me. And I said, why don't you send me back to my home base? And he called up my wing commander back at my home base, which was then at Albuquerque, and said, here's what this guy's been doing, and he's lieutenant colonel, and that's bad. And my boss said, send him home, I'll take care of him. Of course, my boss back there and I were old drinking buddies, so when I got home, he says, don't do that anymore. And, of course, my whole military career was a lot of those, don't do that anymore. But at the same time, I kept being promoted, and I wound up...
Promoted and protected.
Promoted and protected. Protected by my enlisted men underneath me, protected by generals above me. So he's a good man, you know, so everybody gets drunk. Don't worry about it too much. And so I was kept going all the time till I was honorably separated after I got sober. And I got sober because I was dispatched to the Pentagon from my base in Hawaii then with top secret war plans. I got drunk. I don't know what happened to them. I lost them. They never showed up in the Pentagon. They were going to courts-martial me, which meant that at my point in life, a father of 4, the first of whom was just entering college, the first number 1, and the other 3 yet to go, and I'm looking at a courts-martial which would have put me out of the Air Force, a dishonorable discharge, no retirement pay, and maybe even breaking rocks in a federal prison because losing a top-secret war plan in the middle of a war.
And you had gone from Hawaii to Washington to deliver these plans.
I had. But there I realized I was at the end of my rope when they called me up from Hawaii and said, we can't find the papers. And I knew I was desperate. So I threw myself into the hands of some members of AA. Mm-hmm. They took me under their wing. They told me that you have got, or else you're going to lose everything, you have got to go and tell the truth. And you've got to do it with God's protection. You've got to turn your life over to the Almighty God as you understand Him. And they convinced me of this. And the only thing that convinced me was I stayed at a young couple's home one night. I was so shaky I couldn't eat the food, so the young wife gave me a bowl of milk that I could drink with two hands. They put me in a bed downstairs in an unfinished basement, a big black hole under their house. They apologized. It was the only bedroom they had. Army cot, and one lone light bulb in that whole big empty black hole. And there I was by myself when down those stairs came the owner of the home, a recovering alcoholic, member of AA. I heard him come clumping down the stairs, and he came down the stairs, and he had a bedroll under one arm, and he rolled it out on the cement floor alongside of my cot. He said to me, he says, I know exactly how you feel tonight. I've been there myself. I'm going to stay here with you, and I was never so glad in my whole life that a human being could understand me this well and would give up his nice warm bed upstairs and sleep on a cement floor alongside of me to let me understand that he understood me. That was a message from one AA guy to another that hit me like a brick block. I went back to my home where there was a preparatory investigation. I had to stand there under oath, tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and I sat down and I told them. I was on alcohol. I had been on some other drugs that fights had given me back pain. And I said, I don't know where I've been or what I did. Well, they said, that looks pretty bad. A few days later, my boss, the general, got a call from the two-star general in the Pentagon, said, we're awful sorry. We found those papers that Schulstad brought up here. They were in a little safe in the back of a big vault, and everything's okay.
So you had delivered the papers.
Well, who knows? I didn't know. 20 years later, I'm in Hawaii visiting an old friend of mine, a colonel who was retired, like I was then retired. He said, you know, the last time I saw you, you came into my office back there in Langley Field, and you brought in a package of papers, and you put them down, bang, on my desk, and you stuck your finger in my chest, and you said, John, take these papers up to the Pentagon today and deliver them to General so-and-so, or I'll kill you. And he says, I did. And that was the first time I found out how those papers got into that safe. And in the years of going by and the alcohol AA stories I told, people asked me, how did they get there? I said, God put them there, because I didn't know. And that was what saved my life.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed my archived conversation with my mentor, my hero, and my longtime friend, Mel Schulstad, a proud person in recovery whose heartprints are on advocacy in the recovery movement. May he rest in peace. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you have chosen, as long as you have been in continuous recovery for a year or more, do drop us a note, would you, at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Now, coming up next, award-winning actor Danny Trejo, who has well over 50 years in 12-step recovery. He's going to talk about the importance of 12-step programs, at least for him. We'll do that in just 60 seconds.
Are you afraid? Afraid of life without drugs and alcohol? There is help and hope at Sundown M Ranch. At Sundown, the focus is on you and your disease. You will learn how to live without depending on drugs and alcohol. Sundown M Ranch is nationally recognized for effective and affordable alcohol and drug treatment programs. Reclaim your life. Replace your fears with hope. Go to www.sundown.org right now to learn more.
And now, as promised, let's hear from the great actor Danny Trejo on the importance of 12-step programs.
I knew about 12-step programs. I walked into my first 12-step program at 15 years old. And so I knew about them. And I knew what they offered, and I knew what happened when you left them. They tell you, if you leave this program, you will die, go insane, or go to jail. And I proved that right. It wasn't like, they're lying. Every time I left, I went to jail.
That wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, do me a favor if you would. Share it with at least one other person. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. If you'd like to get in touch, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also be sure and hit the subscribe or follow button. That's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. If you're considering treatment for a friend or a loved one, be sure and visit NAATP.org/AID. That stands for the Addiction Information Directory. It's an up-to-date list of those treatment programs that adhere to the strict ethical guidelines. One of them, of course, is Sundown M Ranch, but there are 1,000 other good treatment programs around the country as well. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, a national podcast. And another big shout out to our sponsoring organization, the good folks at Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Find them at sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.